Hey, what's up with it, guys? Hey, welcome back to another video. Now this is going to be a quick overview of the Covenant and the Soulbind system. Now let me grab this page over here. The Covenant system and the Soulbinds are going to be kind of the big change, the big new thing coming in Shadowlands as far as systems. So my hope with this video is to give you guys kind of a quick overview and let you understand the basics of it in one spot where it's real concise and real easy. So we're going to go over three things first: the Covenants, then the Soulbinds, then the Conduits. Those are the three kind of big ones that you need to understand here. Now, the Covenants, think of them as basically sub-factions or families or teams that you can basically pick regardless of what faction you're playing or what class or spec you're playing. You're going to pick between one of these four Covenants. Now, up here on this calculator, which I will link down below, you can sort between the four different Covenants. Now, you'll see when this changes, down here on the right, you're going to have two abilities that change. Now, there are two Covenant abilities you're going to get. One is just a generic Covenant ability that you're going to get regardless of what class or spec you're playing. One of them is going to be a class-specific ability. Not spec-specific, but class-specific. It's important to understand that, because if you're prioritizing or thinking you're going to play a healer going into Shadowlands, you want to make sure that you're aware that your class-specific ability might be like a DPS ability or some kind of absorb shield for yourself or something like that. So it's important to understand the two. When you're clicking through the different Covenants here, the ability on the far right is the Covenant specific ability that is irrelevant of your class, and then the ability on the left is your class specific ability. Now you can see when I shuffle through the classes down here at the bottom, the one on the left is going to change. Now it's important to, just like I said, understand both of these abilities because these are going to pretty significantly impact your playstyle. These abilities by themselves are more or less the reason people are kind of picking different Covenants, but I want to go over some other things that will kind of hopefully shed some light on some other aspects that I think are important reasons to be able to determine which Covenant you want to play. Now, the other thing that's important to understand before we get into the Soulbinds is that the actual Covenants are all different themes. Now, this is the lens you're going to be playing Shadowlands through on this character. Now, these are the zones you're going to at least initially have access to. The storyline, the kind of like central hub, is going to be based on what Covenant you pick. So, for example, Necrolord being this kind of undead scourge type, theme. If you don't like that theme, Necrolord might not be a pretty enjoyable experience for you. You have something like Night Fae, for example, that's this more druid, nature type vibe. Might be more of like what you're looking for going into Shadowlands. So while I wouldn't necessarily solely pick it because of the kind of the theme and the lore behind it, it is important to understand that, because you don't want to set yourself up where you're playing a bunch of content that you just don't enjoy because you don't like the theme. So just keep that in mind as well. Kyrian is kind of like the up in the clouds Odin type style. Necrolord, like I said, is the undead. Night Fae is like the druid nature type vibe, and Venthyr is the kind of vampire type vibe. So now let's go on to the Soulbinds. Within each of these, you can see as I've been shuffling between the Covenants, we have three Soulbinds to pick. Now, the Soulbinds are basically Covenant specific talent trees. Within each of these Covenant, you're going to have three Soulbinds you're going to have access to. Every Covenant has three, so it's not going to change as far as quantity that you'll have access to. And these are supposed to be, for the entirety of Shadowlands, easy to swap between. Your Covenants, however, are not. So you want to make a decision and pick a Covenant. However, these Soulbinds are going to be relatively flexible as far as your ability to swap between different points in them and swap between different Soulbinds themselves out in open world or dungeons and raids and things like that. Now the Conduits are kind of the last piece of this puzzle, are going to be these kind of blank slots that you see inside of the Soulbind talent trees. Now think of the Conduits kind of like talent gems, if you will. Each of the Conduits is going to give you basically passive bonuses to various abilities. Now, the one that's little X is two swords that are crossed. These are Potency Conduits, which basically straight up are going to increase your overall output. The little shield looking thing is an Endurance Conduit, which has to do with all defensive things. And the Finesse Conduit, which is a little lightning bolt, generally has things to do with utility, speed, cooldowns, and things like that. Now it's important to note too that a lot of these talents a lot of the conduits are going to vary in quantity of types of conduits you can get. I'll say that again. The Soulbinds themselves are going to vary with the quantity of types of conduits that you can get. So the way Blizzard is intending, whether this is the case on launch, but what they're intending to do is if conduit's abilities, the actual conduit ability themselves, are stronger, they're going to be balanced out by having less access to potency conduits. If the Soulbind is weaker in output, it'll have potentially more potency conduits you can do. So there's a lot of kind of levers that they can pull and adjust to help alleviate something that's overpowered or something that's super strong, which is why I would urge you to pick a covenant based on kind of more variables than just like how one ability is performing. Because while, for example, like the Venthyr Covenant for Windwalker Monk is very strong right now, this easily could get nerfed, as well as potentially some of the Soulbind abilities or different, maybe you can get 3 potency conduits in one of the other trees or something like that. There's variables that can still change at this point that might make some of the other covenants stronger, especially something like even just getting a nerf to this one ability that will kind of, balance everything back out. Now, the last thing I didn't really touch on too much, but these Soulbind abilities are pretty significant and are going to have a lot of nuance to them and kind of add a lot of flavor to your overall experience when you're playing in Shadowlands. Now, it's important to note is that each of the Soulbinds themselves are going to have all different Soulbind abilities within one covenant, but these do not change based on class. You can see if I'm filtering between the classes here, none of these are changing. None of the actual abilities are changing. The only thing that's changing with my class is my covenant specific ability. So I would encourage you guys to spend 30-45 minutes going through and reading each of the Soulbind abilities in each of the covenants, because some of these might be really interesting to you, especially some of these bottom ones, and then the one that unlocks at the top are pretty significant as far as what they're going to impact in your actual gameplay. The stuff in the middle generally has to do with like speed, mobility, repairs, gathering extra materials and things like that. Nothing super game changing here, but on the bottom row and on the top generally are pretty significant impacts as far as various buffs you're going to get, ways you're going to be able to mitigate damage, constant move speed you're going to have, or constant healing, and all kinds of stuff like that. So I would encourage you to look at these, because these could be very impactful for you and your play style depending on what spec and class you are leaning towards playing. Now, the one last thing I wanted to talk on here with the conduits is that you'll see here when I click on any of these, there's a drop down menu. Now, these are all of the actual conduits themselves, and you'll see when I hover over, there's all of these ranks. Now, I'm not sure personally at this time, I haven't looked into exactly what it's going to entail to rank these up. That's what I think will be kind of the biggest grind part of Shadowlands, at least in my opinion thus far, is trying to get these maxed out. However, these are going to be pretty significant in your overall DPS output, so it is important to kind of understand that, but at the same time, just kind of understanding what the conduits themselves are doing is kind of the bigger deal here. And so I would encourage you to go through and just read through the actual conduits. Don't worry about the ranks, but just read through the actual conduits to see what kind of things you're going to be able to basically buff up with your own play style, and abilities you're going to be able to strengthen, ways you're going to be able to reduce certain cooldowns and things like that are pretty significant, and the impact on your gameplay from the actual conduits and some of these various effects is pretty significant in certain situations. Last but not least is the legendary system. I would encourage you as well to go in through and look and at least understand from a basic level some of the legendaries that you're going to have access to, because some of those legendaries might also have some crazy synergies with some of these potency conduits, or even potentially some of the endurance conduits, as well as some of the Soulbind abilities themselves. So there's a lot of things to kind of take in. Hopefully this helps you guys understand the basics and the outline of the new systems that are coming in Shadowlands, and you can kind of use this as a reference. This calculator is great, and it's been really helpful, and I've learned a lot just messing around with it. So I encourage you guys to spend some time, go through the Soulbind calculator and mess with it and see what you guys come up with, some creative builds, some fun ways of playing the classes you're looking forward to playing. So with that said, thanks so much for watching, guys, and I'll catch you in the next one. See ya.